Welcome to Bankole's Nation. I'm your host, Bankole Thompson. Thank you so much for joining us. Coming up this week, we're talking to outgoing Detroit Police Chief James White, the exit interview about the state of the Detroit Police Department, and then my interview with the Reverend Adam Russell Taylor, the president of the renowned Sojourners magazine, is here to respond to the presidential election, the state of the nation, in the next Trump era. It's all coming up on this week's episode of Bankole's Nation. Stay with us. Let's bring in outgoing Detroit Police Chief James White. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I want to begin in terms of you gave the reasoning why you're leaving the department. You're headed to the largest mental health agency in the state, correct?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
One of the ones.
Why did you feel the need to leave, the position of police chief for the city of Detroit?
Well, it really wasn't something that I had planned to do this soon. I mean, obviously, when you're a police chief that, it's not something you're going to do for, a decade. At least that wasn't my desire
Right.
with the volume of work and the pace that you operate with. But I certainly, knew that I would be here 2 or 3 years when I took the position. When I saw the DWIN opening, I was rather surprised. But it's something that I'm passionate about. Something that I want to contribute to, is something that my education and background supports. And when I saw the opening, I knew that that was a job that really was a dream job for me, so that I can continue to make an impact in our community, but with a different hat, so to speak, from a different lens, where I see that I can make an impact. Mental health issues in our community are prevalent throughout a number of different issues, and particularly in law enforcement.
Yeah. So then my question becomes, is it an issue of fatigue, though? Because some of the police runs that your department has been engaged in recently have been related to mental health.
Well, it's not fatigue. We handle about 45 to 48 runs a day that have a direct mental health causation. And then there are some that are non-direct, that just have a mental health nexus, and those get into the 60s and 70s per day. So we don't have the fatigue, but what we need is the assistance. When we look at the fact that oftentimes police are the first to respond to those situations, that's not always ideal. It's necessary, but it's not ideal because of circumstance. Police have to provide that layer of safety when they react to those runs. And since COVID, we have truly become the primary the first responders in mental health due to the violent nature of the calls themselves.
Given that you're doing this many runs on mental health related crimes or mental health related incidents, do you feel that the department is almost becoming a quasi mental health center clinic, if you will?
That's a great question. The late great Benny Napoleon once said, and it's been restated by many police leaders, that the Wayne County Jail is the biggest mental health facility in the city of Detroit. And it's because there's so many people there that are in crisis, and their reaction to basic daily living, or the circumstances that they find themselves in, are directly attributable to the fact that they are in mental health crisis or in need of services. We have become, unfortunately, a quasi triage for mental health patients based on the nature of our work, and the fact that when people are acting erratic, the first thing we do is call the police.
And that leads me to another question, and that is, it's only recently that we have seen the question of mental health become a focus in law enforcement. Hardly do we find police chiefs or law enforcement leaders who are even willing to publicly admit mental health as a factor in crime apprehension and so forth. And, you've become one of the few police chiefs who have actually publicly, repeatedly talked about the nexus between mental health and law enforcement. And I'm just curious, now that you're leaving this department, where does that leave the DPD in terms of mental health, the scarcity of resources, and so forth?
No, the DPD, I think, has been on the forefront of putting in process and policy to ensure longevity in this area of mental health and a response. We have implemented a number of best practices. We are looked at from other agencies around the country. We've just helped two local agencies implement their mental health co-response unit. And I think because of that, and people now understanding the complexities of policing and mental health, also not that COVID brought anything good to anyone. One of the things that it did cause is for us not to be able to unsee the impact of mental health in our community. I think that social isolation for that year, where people couldn't move normally like they were used to, where they couldn't congregate, they could not communicate, they could not participate in basic interactions such as sporting events and school. The impact of that in that small sample size or that small period of time was profound. And we have still not recovered from it. And I think as a result, we are now more open to this notion that mental health is truly something to have to address. It's always been there. We just haven't had the degree of comfort we have now in talking about it.
So does DPD have what it takes now in terms of dealing with the mental health crisis that emanates in police runs, or is it a question of still looking for resources?
I think we have what we need, but we're never going to have enough. I won't say never. We're not anywhere close to having enough because the crisis, is one that changes daily. The numbers are not, there's no set number. There's not, 100 people or 1,000 people that are in need. The need changes on a daily basis. So, you have to continue to equip the department, the police department, the community with resources in order to address it. And I think it needs to be a multi-layered approach. It's not just the police, but it is and the police. I think from a security standpoint, the police have to secure the area or secure the circumstance in which the care provider can do their work safely. When someone makes the decision to call the police on a loved one, that's a difficult decision to make.
Right.
And they're calling in the police because the person that they love is acting so erratic that they're either in fear of their safety for themselves, or they're in fear of the loved one's safety where they may harm themselves or harm others. So that's a tough call already. Now we're coming in as police officers and saying to them, okay, your loved one that you're concerned about is so erratic, you call the police. We don't know them, but we're here to help you. So what we're looking at, this erratic behavior that presents a danger for all of us, has to be addressed. And oftentimes, what we see in that instance is, officers try everything from verbal de-escalation. Sometimes it elevates to a use of force depending on the circumstances. So it's a very complex issue. So when you talk about resources, you got to continuously add. One quick example for you is we've implemented a number of non-lethal tools. We have a beanbag gun, we have a rubber bullet. And I know that some people would frown upon that, but the alternatives to these circumstances are much more aggressive, to say the least. And when we can deploy tools that may cause pain compliance, but we don't have a loss of life, that's a win for the person who's in crisis, and that's a win for the police department. So it's an evolving need. It's going to continue to change. But I think really the biggest change that needs to happen in our communities is that there are a significant number of long-term healthcare facilities to provide people with the services that they need.
Right. Okay. You're wearing your incoming DWIN cap and outgoing police chief cap as well. But let's delve into the department under your tenure. My last conversation with you, we talked about ShotSpotter, which I think you and I both continue to disagree with on that. But let's delve into that in terms of the crime situation in Detroit. And I asked it from the viewpoint that we even though you make the argument that the numbers are going down and crime control and so forth, but we still see the rush of violence. We see violent crime becoming more rampant, and so forth all across the city. And it makes one wonder that if crime is really under control, why do we have this spate of violent crime?
Well, it's a very complex social issue, okay, and requires people much smarter than I, people like yourself, who can study this stuff and bring forward the issues that are behind violent crime. Let's just take last night, for example. You had an 8-year-old and a 9-year-old who were having a fight. Now, I grew up at a time when that happened every single day. The 8-year-old is having a fight about something that happened around Halloween. He somehow engages a 14-year-old who we believe to be related to him. And that 14-year-old gets engaged in it, but he's not fighting, but he's kind of bringing his part of it to the conversation, whether it was arguing or whatever, but no physical blows. The 8 and the 9-year-old were the only two physical blows. A 16-year-old enters the equation who decides to bring a gun to this argument and this fight. The 16-year-old pulls the gun, shoots the 14-year-old in the chest, and while shooting, inadvertently shoots his own mother, who was also there trying to break up the fight, and shoots her in the arm. So you have a 14-year-old who's in critical condition. You have the mom of the 14-year-old has a bullet in her arm, and you have a 16-year-old who thought it was a good idea to bring this gun in the first place. And then I have people this morning asking me, what are you going to do about that? Okay, well, let's talk about that. How did he have access to the gun? Who around him made that okay or did not check to see his movements? He's 16. That's something that no police department in any country, in any city, in any state can control. Parental responsibility. The idea that one would think it would be okay to intervene in a fight between an 8 and 9-year-old with a gun is at the very least a poor choice. At the most significant part of the fight, where he shoots his mom inadvertently. These are not policing issues, because that all that does is put the police in a reactionary mode. All we can do in that case is make an arrest. All of the work that needed to happen should have come from the village prior to the incident where you needed the police. And the village should have intervened and intersected the fight, or disrupted this young man's idea that using that level of violence to remedy a fight was appropriate. And so how we measure crime in Detroit is like any other major city. How are we compared to what we were last year, and how have we performed the year before? And as we continue to build these pillars and these layers to our crime strategy, there are things that we can do, like our CVI group, our community violence interrupters. I think that's one of the best programs that we have, because they are in those spaces that I can't get in dressed like this. People are looking at me. I'm just a police chief or cop to some. But our community violence interrupters, they're in these communities. Many of them live in those communities, and they're able to engage at a very different level, maybe not a higher level, but a more appropriate level to disrupt some of this violence. And as a result, we can say that we're down 18% in homicides. We're down 13% in sexual assaults. And this year alone, 168 less people have been shot non-fatally, and 39 people less this year have been murdered. When I took over as chief, those numbers were extraordinarily high. And these numbers last year, we beat out the 1966 numbers, and we're beating out the numbers of last year, which will be even greater than the 1966 numbers. One of the things I find interesting, though, is the critics. And you can learn a lot from the critics, because what they will tell you is, well, see, Chief, you don't have 1 million people in Detroit like you did in '66. Okay, let's talk about that. Did you have 4 major stadiums in Detroit in 1966? Did you have the Pistons, the Red Wings, the Lions, and the Tigers in downtown Detroit? Did you have an inviting downtown in Detroit that between Thursdays and Sundays in the month of April to October invited over 2 million people to visit the downtown area? Did you have a ineffective, what I believe to be system of counting folks, where yes, the census says that 670,000 people live in the city of Detroit. You walk in any room in this city, and you see city residents and ask one question: did you do the census? Every hand is not going to go up. Probably half of the hands are going to go up. So until you can definitively tell me we're not policing the same number of people, I think that's a flawed argument. Because we are policing that many people. We're policing over 1 million people because of the draws to downtown. We had 775,000 people that watched the Lions choose use at the draft. I'm sorry.
And no, that's fine. I mean, I think that's a cogent argument to make in defense of your position. But here's the other side of that argument, though. There are people who tell me, well, there seems to be a disparity in enforcement. That you have we have the big what was the biggest sporting event Detroit had recently?
The draft.
The draft, 775,000. Right. The draft, exactly. And you have police presence everywhere, and it's flawlessly executed. I mean, there are other major marquee events that are held downtown, flawlessly executed. And critics will point, they'll say, well, whenever we have these major events, flawlessly executed, law enforcement is right there and so forth. Chief White and his men and women are there. But then in the neighborhoods, then the question of a response time comes into play.
12 minutes. We meet the national average, and oftentimes we fall below the national average. Mm-hmm. I have heard those conversations, and I am very visible when those things come up. I walk the neighborhoods and I talk to the community. I'll tell you, we had a situation in the Boston Edison district, and we put footbeats in, and it wasn't humorous, but it was interesting. You could do a social experiment on it. I had half the residents were very complimentary of the foot patrols and happy to see them. And I had when I speak half, I'm only speaking of half of the people that were there. Right. Had to walk a mile. But I had a significant number that were there that were very critical of it and saying, I don't want to see officers walking around in my neighborhood because I feel like people may feel there's something interesting. And I explained to both sides, and I appreciate both of their opinions and commentary. But it kind of served to me as a living example of the conundrum you find yourself in when you're trying to serve everyone at the same time in the best interest of what your crime strategy is. We've done some really good things. The officers have been amazing, but you're not going to make everybody happy. And when you talk about the service level, specifically what? Because if you look at the response time, our average response time is below the national average. It's consistently below the national average and has improved year over year. We talked about the block party details, and we had a situation where hundreds and hundreds of people were popping up at 2:00 in the morning and engaging in high risk behavior. We allowed those to go on. We wanted them to go on safely. But how many times can we have people get shot and hurt and injured? How many calls can I take from residents who say, listen, I don't mind people having a party, but at 2:00 in the morning, I want to go to sleep. And half the people in the middle of my street that are drinking and leaving the bottles in the street get into a fight, and some of them pull out guns and shoot each other. That's not safe for my neighborhood. That bullet can come in my home and hit my child. And oh, by the way, some of those bullets have hit those innocent folks' homes who have nothing to do with the party. So we go out and we disrupt those, and we use a significant number of officers. So then I'm told that I have too many officers disrupting block parties, but I don't have. You see the problem. Yeah. The idea is to provide a layer of safety that is consistent. That is appropriate, not over policing, that is constitutional. That is absolutely constitutional.
And that goes to my next question. Two protracted issues that DPD has dealt with over the years, and that is the question of constitutional policing. You're still paying out lawsuits for actions of police officers. Could be, whether adjudicated misconduct, behavior, and so forth. And when I used to cover Detroit City Council under then the late Marion Mahaffey, president of the City Council back then, I used to look at the City Council budget and millions of dollars in police payout lawsuits and so forth. So the police department is still doing that. And then there's also the other issue, which has been a bone of contention, the Giglio list with the prosecutor's office in terms of officers who have been found who could no longer testify in cases. And you still have remnants of that Giglio list in the police department. My question to you, though, is those two issues, where are they now as you leave the department?
Yeah, well, lawsuits in the
With the
police.
lawsuits, huh?
We'll start with the lawsuits. I mean, we have risk management processes. I've just, in fact, invested in a multi-million-dollar risk management suite to identify high-risk behavior, address it. I have been extraordinarily transparent about officer accountability, taking a lot of criticism from many people on that front, but it's the right thing to do. I celebrate good policing, and we've got a lot of great officers who do great things. But I've never seen any organization anywhere that has 100% of employee group operating at 100%, and there's no room for improvement in any profession, whether it's policing, brain surgery, astronauts. I have never seen it. Maybe it exists, but I think that there's room for improvement in every organization. We are not unlike any organization that has room for improvement. If we have someone who operates outside of our policies and procedures, there are remedies for that. Frankly, there are some behaviors that in policing you can't recover from. And we've been very consistent with that. We are one of the highest educated police departments. We brought an education incentive program here when I started as chief. I think a highly educated department makes better decisions. I don't think education makes you smarter, but I think it activates cognitive thinking. It activates reason at various levels. And you want people to be innovative and thinkers when they are engaged with a customer base that involves crime and punishment. So things have gotten a lot better, but I don't think we will ever have a time under any chief that you will have no lawsuits against the Detroit Police Department, and simply solving or settling, I'm sorry, a lawsuit doesn't necessarily mean the department did anything wrong. Right. That whole process, as you know, having worked around it, it involves how much investment you want to put into defending the case versus whether the officers were right or wrong. I monitor lawsuits. I look for repeat lawsuits on behaviors that we need to change internally, and we do that. And we have done that. And since the consent judgment, we continue to make great strides. We work with the U.S. Attorney's Office. We have an open door with them if they have questions about some of our uses of force. Dawn Isom has been absolutely fantastic, but she is not my friend. She's friendly, but we are not buddies. When she has a serious question to ask me about this organization and how it's running, or something that she's concerned about, she asked those questions very transparently with my command team, and we have turned over active investigations to Dawn Isom. She has sat and watched video of uses of force with me in my command meeting, with my command team. So all of those layers keep this department upright and moving in the right direction. Your last one about the Giglio list, there's always been some confusion about who establishes the Giglio list and what that means. If we have a member in this organization, and for your audience, one of the component, but not the only component of Giglio, if someone misrepresented facts or lied. Well, we have a zero tolerance policy for lying in the Detroit Police Department. If you're found guilty of lying, you're terminated. But then there are people who establish the Giglio list that some investigations that you're involved in where that's questioned is enough to make you eligible for the Giglio list. That is still being litigated or discussed, and that's all I really have on that right now.
So is there a tug of war between your office and the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office?
I won't call it a tug of war, but she's the one who assigns that Giglio list and makes that decision. I don't 100% agree all the time with who should be on it based on the facts that I have, but she's the prosecutor. and she's been a prosecutor a very long time for a reason. So I respect and support her decision, but I just have a different view of some of the people that are on the giglio list, and some of them I totally agree with. And we try on our end contractually to ensure that if they're giglio, that they are not in a position to compromise any investigations. And if they're found to have been dishonest, we discipline them. We remove them from the department. It's just that simple. This business is too important to do anything less.
Two more quick questions for you before we round up this interview, and that is the question of retention. Officers who are trained, paid by DPD, and then within a year or two, they disappear, they head out to other departments. You've dealt with that brain drain. That's been a notorious issue for DPD. The brain drain, and seeing talent that you have trained, nurtured, walk away from the department. Where is DPD now on that issue?
Thank you for bringing that up. That is one of the things that we will take as a win. What we have done. The first thing I have to really credit the mayor for is giving us the raises that we needed to start the conversation with the officers about staying. Staying in a place where you don't have an income to support your family is not a real conversation with folks. And so that raise that gave our officers on average $10,000 was a turning point towards that end. And it was very positive for the officers. It's not only was a morale boost, it kept officers that wanted to stay but couldn't afford to stay economically, because we know we're the best of the best and we see more than any agency. An officer in Detroit will see more in a year than an officer in some other community in the rural areas. They won't see what these officers see in a year in 10, 15 years. So that helped significantly. The other thing that we were able to do is coordinate with the law department a contract, if you will, for folks that want to come to DPD and go somewhere else. Well, if you get our training, we put our investment in you, and you leave within the first, I believe, 2 years. Don't hold me to that. It might be one. I can have my team check on that. But there's a contract that says that if you leave within a certain time frame, you have to pay a prorated amount back to us to reinvest in our department recruiting efforts. And I love that. We have only had to execute, I think, one of those contracts, but we've got well over 100 of them signed and notarized and witnessed. And then lastly, you should know that I have received now, since the new contract of 22, over 160 applications from officers who have left and wanting to come back, and I have accepted about half of them back. The other half, not so. We haven't, for various reasons. I have not. So recruiting and retention is moving in the right direction, and we're pretty happy with where we are.
Final question. You're leaving this department. What is the unsettled issue facing DPD right now as you exit?
Yeah, what a great question. You can never get comfortable with your community relationships, because that's something that you have to work on every single day. And I think, and I know, not think, that the next chief will continue on that process to continue to build those bridges between us and the community, continue to be transparent. I implemented a 45-day review on body camera for officer-involved shooting, something that had never happened in our department before. I've since agreed to lessen that to 30 days. But if there's something that's left undone, I think what I'd like to really address is the youth gun violence in our community, and to work with our CVI groups, continue to work with the Wayne County CEO, Warren Evans, is really invested in the youth in Detroit, and just implemented a program to address juvenile offenders and try to disrupt what they're doing. So when I say it's undone, I'll say it's undone by me, left undone, but it's in process. But that's something that I would want to, I think in my 4th year as chief, my focus would be gun violence amongst youth. I think that's my answer.
And I said it was my final question, but a question just came to mind now that I think I need to ask this on the record. Your name has been bandied around as a potential candidate for Detroit mayor. For the upcoming mayor's race, And I'm curious, and the skeptic in me as a journalist, the natural skeptic in me is saying, is that the reason why you're making the exit? Are there pressures for you to run for mayor of Detroit?
I am so flattered that there's people in this town that think that this little kid from Detroit could run for mayor and follow Mayor Duggan, uh, uh, you know, uh, and the great Coleman A. Young. I mean, I just couldn't even fathom that. I'm sorry to even get. I'm just when I hear that, you don't know what it fills my heart that there somebody is crazy enough to think I'm good enough for that job.
Let me get into African American vernacular. Can you give me the 411 on that? What's the deal?
All right, I'll cut to the chase. I am flattered and honored that someone thinks that I would consider it. I won't tell you that I have not heard that before, and have not even. I won't even tell you I haven't been asked if I'm interested. But I will tell you this: I am very happy with this role at DWIN. I want to give it my best effort. I'm going to put everything I got in it. No one's going to outwork me, and I'm going to make an impact in mental health. That's my dream job. As for mayor, I have no interest in running for mayor in the city of Detroit, but I am flattered that someone would think so.
Has Mayor Duggan ever asked you, had the conversation with you?
Mayor Duggan and I have had many conversations about many things, and many of those are mentoring moments that I keep to myself, sir. But thank you for asking.
Well, thank you very much for being here, Chief White.
All right. Thank you for having me.
Good luck with your future endeavors.
All righty, sir. And thank you for having me.
I'm not on my parents' health insurance anymore, and I work for myself doing a bit of everything. So I found a plan for just $34 a month.
All plans cover doctor visits, prescriptions, emergency care, and more. Healthcare.gov is here for you. Enroll by December 15th.
All right, let's bring in the Reverend Adam Russell Taylor is the president of Sojourners and the author of A More Perfect Union, a new vision for building the beloved community. Reverend Taylor previously led the Faith Initiative at the World Bank and served as the vice president in charge of advocacy at World Vision US and the senior political director of Sojourners. He has also served as the executive director of Global Justice, an organization that educates and mobilizes students around global human rights and economic justice. He was selected for the 2009-2010 class of White House Fellows and served in the White House Office of Cabinet Affairs and Public Engagement, a graduate of Emory University, Harvard Kennedy School of Government, and the Samuel Dewitt Proctor School of Theology. Reverend Taylor, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
I don't know where to begin because at Sojourners, you all have been for decades have been championing the question of economic justice, equality, and so forth. And now the nation finds itself after this presidential election, perhaps at an inflection point. I want to get your official reaction to the presidential election results.
So I was in Philadelphia on election day, and we, as Sojourners, in concert with the Skinner Leadership Institute and the Georgetown Center for Faith and Justice and 50 national partners, have a campaign called Face United to Save Democracy. And we have been working primarily in 10 kind of battleground states, or mostly battleground states, including Pennsylvania, to ensure that faith leaders are on the front lines of not only defending the freedom to vote and our democracy more broadly, but to do that in a way to then transform our democracy, because there's a lot of ways in which I think our democracy has been bruised and battered, right?
Right.
And it was really this experience of joy and pride to see faith leaders provide a moral presence in vulnerable communities and in kind of vulnerable polling sites. I'm grateful that this was a peaceful election. There were a couple of isolated incidents, but it really was kind of a free and fair election. I'm still worried about the impact of kind of new voter restrictions and barriers that have been put in place in many states across the country, particularly in the South and the Midwest. But anyway, I literally experienced this kind of joy and jubilation on election day. A lot of the polling sites had DJs that were spinning music, et cetera. So I went from that experience to, the feeling of kind of nauseous shock on the morning after the election. And in part because I was kind of certainly prepared for a Trump victory, but I thought it was going to be a razor-thin margin either way. And certainly that's what a lot of the polling had shown.
Yeah.
Though even this result is still in the margin of error. So I think we have to be a little careful about saying this is, a landslide victory. I think it's certainly more decisive than I certainly expected. But we had put in place a whole strategy to try to ensure that every vote is counted, which we still believe is really important. The House has not been officially called yet, as well as many other races down ballot, but also really prepared for trying to ensure that the certification process went smoothly and that we did not see, a real outbreak of political violence. And while, some of that work is still necessary, a lot of it really it's been shifted because we saw a decisive Trump victory. So for me, I guess this is a moment where there are many people that are hurting and grieving, and there are obviously many Americans that are celebrating and are elated. And I've tried to hold two things together as I think about this election. On the one hand, I think we have to do some real reckoning and soul searching around why the ways in which candidate Trump stoked and appealed to so much racism or race baiting, misogyny, and used a lot of, kind of quasi-fascist rhetoric in this election was not a deal breaker for more voters, right? And I know people's motivations as they vote are often complex, so I recognize that. But I think it is troubling, and it's something that we really need to wrestle with as a country, and particularly speaking as a Christian leader, as a person of faith, why that wasn't more disqualifying. And at the same time, I think this is a time to be kind of willing and committed to listen more, to try to better understand, why many Americans, including, at least from what we can tell from the exit polls, an increased number of Latinos, of Black men and others ended up voting for Trump. And ultimately, I believe that I'm called to love my enemies, and I am very much committed to that. So, I think we have to resist easy answers. We have to, really try to lean into building deeper relationships. And, there's a part of the country that I want to better understand and, really, find ways to support in a more tangible way. I guess the last thing I'll just say really quickly is, clearly economic anger and anxiety played a major role in this election. And one of the major commitments of Sojourners over a very long time has been to try to not only combat poverty in America, but end it and really promote economic justice. And, we are not the Democratic Party. We are a nonpartisan organization, but it does feel like Vice President Harris's message around the economy really didn't break through. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. I think that she was dealt a pretty tough hand in the context of, 3 months to campaign and
100 days.
Right. That's right. But, there are ways in which that kind of economic message did not, really inspire people or really, reassure people. And one of the things I was frustrated about, and I still don't really have a good answer why this case wasn't made more clearly in the campaign. But, I've been involved in a lot of legislative fights, if you will, around a number of things. And a lot of the agenda that the Biden-Harris administration tried to push through that would have, significantly helped, particularly working class Americans, everything from, making the expansion of the child tax credit permanent because it expired after the American Rescue Plan ended. Providing paid medical family leave, expanding access to universal child care, housing assistance. Those efforts, those measures were blocked right, left, and center by the Republican-controlled House. And we have had a relatively dysfunctional House in many respects, just in terms of the leadership of the House and some of the drama in the House, right?
Yep.
And I'm not, into necessarily playing the blame game, but I think that we have to be truth tellers, particularly as Christian leaders. And there are ways in which the Republican-controlled Congress and the House, really blocked a lot of the things that would have made a real difference much quicker. And so I just feel like that message did not really come out. And, it's one of a number of things I wish had kind of played out differently in this election. But anyway, that's a long answer to your question, but those are some of the things I'm wrestling with.
I think it sets the premise for this conversation. I'm wondering, as I hear you speak, do you feel that the Democratic Party, as one of our two-party systems, now ought to go into a self-introspection here? And the question that has been raised, a Socratic question, and that is whether the party is willing to be humbled enough to look at itself in the mirror, Michael Jackson, the man in the mirror, and really do, a deconstruction of where it could have done better.
I think that is
urgency for that.
Yeah, no, I think there is urgency for that. No question. Yes. Yes, many Democrats did better than Harris did overall. So, again, we got to kind of put it in perspective.
Yeah.
But I absolutely think that's necessary. And I'll just say one thing that I have been frustrated by, which is that the kind of religious outreach and engagement of kind of Democratic campaigns in general, this is not just a Biden-Harris challenge, right, has often been an afterthought, has often been relatively weak. And I think, that probably wouldn't have changed the ultimate outcome, but I think there's ways in which the Democratic Party cedes way too much ground to the Republicans when it comes to religious engagement and being able to kind of, share and communicate the importance of faith for those Democratic candidates that have a strong faith.
Well,
and what happens though, and this is, I'll give a great example of this.
Sure.
I think it often kind of gets reduced to Black church engagement, and I come out of the Black church, so I know that's really important. But the religious diversity of the country is obviously much greater than that. And, we often don't see a really robust outreach effort to evangelicals, to Catholics. I mean, again, we'll see the more official results, but it looks like there was a real shift toward now President-elect Trump among white Catholics, among evangelicals. And then, we'll see beyond that. And so that's kind of another area where I think there's real reason and room for improvement. And I'm deeply worried that this election outcome will kind of supercharge the Christian nationalist movement and mindset. You're already hearing, many people on the right kind of claim that not only is this evidence of the United States being a chosen nation, but God has chosen Trump as their candidate, as their president. And I think that is kind of dangerous theology, right?
Well, I was going to say, what is your theological response to that?
My theological response is that God gives us free will. And ultimately, it is the majority of Americans in an election that choose our president. I think we do have a responsibility to pray for the incoming administration, and I'm certainly doing that as we speak. But to believe that God blesses particular candidates, I think can easily devolve into a form of idolatry. And if we think about, the course of the Bible, how many times did, the Israelites make the wrong choice? And then because of their disobedience, there were consequences. And so to pretend that we somehow know the will of God, I think, again, is foolhardy. And, we have to constantly pray and hope and ask God to kind of be on our side rather than presume that ask, that God is going to, bless the things that we think are going to lead to greater justice, greater peace, greater flourishing of everyone's life, and greater human dignity.
I want to move this conversation towards the question of the multiracial coalition. For a long time, we've talked about that: Black, brown, white, you name it, everybody. The Democratic Party is this big tent, the multiracial coalition. Given the outcome of this presidential election, do you feel that coalition is in fact on the verge of an extinction? That might be an extreme terminology, but I'm just trying to get your reaction here. Do you feel that coalition is standing on sinking sand as we speak, given the demographics, how Trump was able to peel off, not even that much significant, of course it was significant on the Hispanic side, but was able to peel off so many demographics within the multiracial coalition that the Democrats claim to have or even own a real estate of?
Well, I think that this is an important lesson that you can't take for any voters for granted. And I think there's been ways in which the Latino community has been taken for granted or felt that way. Same with many parts of the Black community. And so to just kind of rest on history and presume that, history is going to, guarantee that that support will be there is arrogant and foolhardy. So I think that some of that introspection that we talked about earlier is really necessary, and some deeper listening to really try to understand like what messages broke through or didn't break through. I mean, I'll go back to what I said before, just, my deep concern that, certain ways in which I think a lot of candidate Trump's campaign message felt like dog whistles and kind of race baiting. I'm not even clear what percentage of Black voters, Latino voters were paying attention and actually heard some of those things. I think that we live in a time where there's a lot of exhaustion, there's a lot of cynicism, and there's, kind of disparate information ecosystems.
Right.
So, part of the challenge is like, did people actually hear what was said at Madison Square Garden just a week before the election? Did they really hear some of the messages from Trump himself, naming that he not only believes there are enemies within, and he named, many Democrats that were in that list, but signaled that he would use the military to come after them. So, there's a lot of extreme things that happen, and I just don't really know how much actually broke through and how much people are paying attention. And so, that's part of the dilemma and the question that's before us. I mean, I think one of the things that I certainly gain hope from, and I really was reminded of this being in church on Sunday. So I am an active member of Alpha Street Baptist Church in the Washington, D.C. area in Alexandria. And our church has been around since 1803. We have seen, and in some cases withstood, 45 different presidents. And one of the really inspiring things that happened the week after the election, which is already kind of pre-planned, on the Saturday afterward, we host the largest college fair for historically Black colleges and universities. And you may know this history, but the majority of HCBUs were founded after the end of Reconstruction.
That's right.
Extremely painful time in our nation's history. And what did we go do? We built almost 100 institutions to help promote Black excellence and Black education and advancement. And we had 10,000 students from around the country that were at this place called the St. James this past weekend. And it was just such a powerful testimony of hope and of resilience. And again, it wasn't directly tied to the election, but it was evidence that like we have to push forward regardless. And, this is a time where I think we have to be particularly committed to defending and protecting the most vulnerable in our midst. This is a core faith commitment. Matthew 25, just as you did the least of these, you also did for me. And in my mind, that certainly includes many, non-citizens, migrants that are in this country that, President Trump is committed to deporting en masse. That includes, I think many of us within the Black community, we don't know what policing is going to look like in a second Trump administration. That includes
the need for constitutional policing.
Right. And I think that includes our LGBTQ siblings as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of vulnerable populations that, I think it's important that we, even in this kind of, somewhat calm before the storm period, if you will, signal that we're going to provide some support and solidarity with.
Right. You mentioned going on a historical excursion. Reconstruction ushered in Jim Crow. Do you feel that we are in a period where this, for some, could be another Reconstruction here? I mean, given the dog whistle campaign of Donald Trump, the things that he said, the audacity of the utterances of the words that he, said on the campaign trail and so forth. Are you deeply concerned that, in fact, we may be going down that road, or is that too overblown?
I am deeply worried, and I we'll say none of us really know for certain.
Mhm.
One of the things that I think is another reason that Trump got reelected is it's hard to know all of what he says it's more about for an effect or is more about entertainment and is more about bombast and how much is, serious commitments that he is going to try to act on, right? But I think that we have to, pray for the best and prepare for the worst. And so I'm kind of preparing for, a Trump administration that literally is going to try to act on all the promises he made. And I think a lot of what happens not only depends on how serious he is about those promises, but it really depends on us. Depends on how much courage and commitment we show in the midst of this. And it also depends on the kind of courage and conscience of those that are still, in the Republican Party that have some deep concerns and misgivings about not just his rhetoric, but also some of the promises he's made. And, I was saying pretty consistently before the election that I really saw the election as a stark choice between, a kind of commitment to try to push our nation further up the mountaintop, if you will, of becoming a truly just, inclusive, multiracial democracy, and the real danger of seeing us slide into some form of autocracy, let alone fascism. And I pray that that doesn't happen, that, that concern and fear is overblown. But, again, based on a lot of what we saw in the first term, let alone the promises he made for a second term, I think that concern is legitimate. And, as we know, the Supreme Court has given presidents moving forward, but in this case, President-elect Trump, practical immunity. And I think he is not going to have around him some of the people that really tried to keep him in check. So again, none of us know, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think it is very important that we are hyper vigilant in, monitoring what's happening and really, showing courage to speak out and to act when and if he starts to, put in place a lot of harmful policies.
Dr. King, quickly, Dr. King talked about the white backlash.
Yeah.
In many of his speeches, and when I look at the overwhelming response that Trump got from white female voters, white male voters who were already there from day one for him, but to have this many white female voters voting for him, about 53%, despite having reproductive rights as a central core of the Democratic campaign message, does that speak to Martin Luther King Jr.'s cry of the white backlash? Going back to Barack Obama's 2008 campaign.
Yeah. Potentially. I think that in some ways, the Harris campaign and Democrats more broadly kind of overplayed their hand on reproductive freedom. It's a really important issue. Right. But I think they overly presumed that many of the people that would come out for ballot initiatives protecting, or essentially trying to, enshrine Roe within state constitutions would then automatically also be voting for Harris. And at least the exit polls are showing that that's not the case. In a lot of cases, like a 15 to 20 point gap between, the vote for Harris and how people voted on ballot initiatives. I think a lot of people were believing that this has become much more of a state issue. And so they could kind of protect the reproductive freedom at the state level and weren't as worried about the national implications of that. That aside, I want to kind of address your question in a slightly different way. One of the things that I am really worried about is that I think a significant number of kind of MAGA supporters, which, obviously Trump supporters, particularly those that come out of what I would call more of the Christian nationalist kind of, ideology, literally are looking for a strong man to protect their interest and to cement their worldview into law, into policy, into governance. And so for them, I think there has been a real white lash. And it's not only about the fears of the changing demographics in this country, but I think many of them have realized that those demographic changes don't mean destiny. The whole democracy is demographic changes are destiny, I think is, again, going back to not something that we can just assume. But I do think there was an understanding that it wasn't going to favor them. And, there's been this kind of willingness to embrace a strong man and even to want someone who's a strong man because that is the kind of leader, kind of president that will protect them. And so that is a lot harder to engage with. That's a lot harder to persuade and to have dialogue with. I still will try. And unfortunately, I don't think that's a majority per se of people that supported Trump. But I do think that that's something that we really have to be mindful of. And again, I think that is a really significant perversion of the Christian faith. And not only is a threat to our democracy long term or even short term, but it really undermines the witness of the church itself. So this, for me, is both a democracy issue and a faith issue. And I recognize too, I guess another thing that I should have said earlier is that I really wrestled with all the ways in which it seems like the threats to democracy also did not land and break through, didn't resonate in the way that I had hoped. And so, we had tried to kind of really break down democracy into core freedoms that we think people do care about, freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, freedom to be able to make choices for your families and so much more. And so I think, we all need to think harder about how, as we see potential threats to our democracy, we can communicate more clearly why democracy matters. And it's a tricky one, right? Because as I said before, we don't have a perfect democracy. There's lots of ways in which I think it's flawed and we need to make some real reforms and transformations of our democracy. But, our democracy enables us as a country to resolve disputes. It enables us, I still think, to promote the common good. I think it's the best system that enables us to ensure mutual thriving. And so when that gets undermined, it jeopardizes, it threatens every single issue that we care about. And, I think people are going to be in for some, shock therapy, if you will, about how much harder it will be to influence a second Trump administration around a lot of the things that they're concerned about, including an issue that I'm deeply concerned about, which is the ongoing war and devastation in Gaza. So, yeah, I'll end that point there, but yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask you this then, as we round up this interview, with the second Trump administration, what does that mean for Sojourners? Has this redefined your mission? What I mean, what are you doing? What's the preparation like from where you sit? Because you do have a constituency that is listening to you.
Yeah. It's a great question. I mean, a couple of things. I mean, one, I think our mission is the same, and in some ways it's more urgently needed now than it was before. And our mission is to articulate the biblical call to justice and peace and to inspire hope and really mobilize people to put their faith into action. And so I think this is a time where we really need to care for one another and try to encourage people to get a little bit of rest if they can. There's a lot of people that are dealing with a lot of trauma and lament and, very understandable emotions. And so, I think that we're trying to kind of play a pastoral role, if you will, with as many as we can. I also think that this is a time to do some of that resetting that we talked about, and we're trying to do that with some of our own strategy. We know, or we're pretty clear about the need, as I said before, to protect the most vulnerable, particularly as we go into the early days of a new administration. And I think that we need to continue to take seriously just how deeply polarized we become as a country, and that is seeped into the church. And so we're actually going to be working to try to address some of that polarization, heal some of that polarization, et cetera, while maintaining a core commitment to justice, which includes a commitment to racial justice. And then I would just say that, this is a time to, really lean into our faith rather than leaning primarily into our politics. And politics is extremely important, but they shouldn't be totalizing. And I know, at least living in DC, sometimes it can feel like it is all consuming. But I have really found that my faith has been my anchor, and it has been my rock in a weary land. It has been really what has grounded me in the midst of all of the motions I've been going through. And at the end of the day, like, I am determined to help put us, onto that track that I talked about earlier of not only becoming an inclusive, just, multiracial democracy, but also helping to build a beloved community that really creates a country where everyone is equally valued and everyone can thrive, and that we really see our growing diversity as a real gift or strength and not a weakness or something to be feared.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Reverend Taylor, for being here.
Thank you.